Hello, I'm Adam Bandt. I'm the Federal Member of Parliament for Melbourne. I'm the Deputy Leader of the Australian Greens. I represent the Greens in the lower house of our Parliament and I look after employment issues for the Greens.
And I'm Penny Wright. I'm Adam's colleague in the Greens. I'm a Senator from the state of South Australia and I help Adam in terms of industrial relations legislation when it goes from the lower house, where Adam is placed, to the upper house in the Senate.
Here in Australia, working with firefighters and fire services from around the country, we managed to get some groundbreaking legislation passed through the Australian Parliament to assist firefighters and their families when they access compensation. And it was groundbreaking because when it was passed, it had the support of every Member of Parliament from right across the political spectrum. When you think about it, if the room that you're in at the moment catches on fire, you will run one way to get out of there, but firefighters come in and they aim to rescue everyone who's there and to preserve property. But when they run into a burning building, as well as risking their lives, they also run into a plume of toxic smoke if that room is on fire. And looking around you in the room that you're in at the moment, if it's like the average room, there's tens of thousands of synthetic chemicals in that room, and when they burn, they produce toxic smoke. And no matter how good a firefighter's uniform is, it has to be able to breathe, and so that means toxic smoke coming in. What that means is that firefighters, and the science is very, very clear on this, are getting cancer at a rate far and above the rest of the population. The problem is, when they go to seek compensation, the courts and the lawyers say, unless you can tell us exactly at what particular fire and exactly from what chemical you contracted your disease, they don't get compensation. And so there have been horrible tales of workers who have leukemia or other diseases being unable to access the same compensation that other workers in other industries would get. I introduced a bill into the lower house of Parliament to rectify this situation, to make it easier for firefighters and their families to access compensation. Not to increase compensation, but just to make it easier for them to get existing compensation. I had it co-sponsored by members of our Labor Party and of our Conservative Party as well as some independents. Initially, a number of members of Parliament weren't so sure, especially from the Conservative side, but through a significant amount of work, we managed to get everyone in our Parliament on board to pass it. And a large part of that was due to the work that Penny did in the Senate.
In the Senate, we have a system of having inquiries into proposed legislation. And I was very proud to work with Adam on this legislation because as a lawyer, I understood how difficult it was to prove causation of an illness that related to toxic substances that someone had been exposed to in the workplace. So there was an extensive inquiry that we had, and during the course of the inquiry we were able to hear from firefighters, we were able to hear from particularly Canadian firefighters who had brought in the first type of this legislation in the world, and they were very credible. They were able to provide the scientific background in relation to the cancers that are caused by the toxic smoke, and also information about the protective equipment and its inadequacies in the end. As well as that, I saw that my colleagues from across the Parliament in the other parties were able to start to really understand the risks that were there for firefighters in the work that they carry out, the difficulties that they faced in being able to prove that their sometimes fatal and often debilitating cancers were related to their work, and their difficulty in getting compensation. So we did hear very troubling and sad stories from widows, from families who had lost their firefighters, and also firefighters who were still dealing with maybe a second or third type of cancer that they had experienced. Through that inquiry process, in which we also were able to go and experience fires and learn more about firefighting, I saw my colleagues from the other parties get a much better understanding and gradually agree that this was a wrong that we needed to rectify in changing the legislation, and Adam's legislation ultimately was passed.
So we want to throw our weight behind what Tommy is trying to do. It's really very important. Australia wasn't the first place to do it. The United States and Canada took the lead. And interestingly, in different parts of those countries, it came from different parts of the political spectrum, from Republicans and from Democrats and from Conservatives and from Progressives. Now our legislation is being rolled out throughout states here in Australia. And if there's one message that we can give to you, it's to take off the party political blinkers when looking at this. Be prepared to work with others across the political spectrum, and just like in other places around the world, you can achieve a significant reform. We here in Australia look quite often to Denmark and to Norway and to other countries in your region for inspiration for progressive law reform, and we hope that this is one instance where you can look to what we've done, following on from the United States and Canada, and help protect all of those who are protecting you.
I was very happy to lend my support to the campaign that I think Tommy is wanting to run in terms of information, and I would suggest that if you were wanting to know more, it would be very good to look at our legislation, but also to look at our committee report, which actually details the science, the justice and the humanity that's involved in this, and we could easily send you links to that if you'd like to look at that. It's available on the internet.
Good luck. Thank you.
Good luck.